The reason that I object to the term writer's block is because it implies an external cause and a problem that is caused by something or someone else that you can blame and that you can use as an excuse. But the truth is actually quite the opposite.
Right.
And so shall I elaborate? Or shall I just leave it there and annoy people?
Just leave it to you. Yeah. Do people?
Why are you whiffling?
Do people actually think writer's block is a real thing?
They do.
Do people use it, or are they being like ironic and kind of witty about the fact that they know they're procrastinating and talking rubbish?
If I told you that people have been prescribed Prozac for writer's block, what would you do?
Roll my eyes pretty hard.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to do that. That's actually happened. Okay, so there's a really interesting article in the New Yorker that I read a while ago, and I've put a link in the show notes.
Ritalin would probably work better. Carry on. Dr. Joe prescribes Ritalin.
Don't. Joe is not a doctor. Don't listen to Joe. Derailed my train.
Sorry.
All over the place.
Sorry.
Carriages everywhere. Really interesting article in the New Yorker that I read quite a while ago called, I can't remember what it was called, but the link's in the show notes. It was about writer's block, and it starts off talking about Samuel Taylor Coleridge of Water, Water All Around fame.
Right.
And he did write that, didn't he?
I've no idea.
The Ancient Mariner, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
Is that Coleridge?
Yes. Oh my god, now I feel like I've...
Who was Cthulhu?
That was not Coleridge, that was... What's his face? That was H.P. Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft, right, okay. Cool.
We're having
terrible education.
Having a literary existential crisis right now. I've now talked myself out of the fact that Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and I'm sure he did.
I would Google it, but we're videoing, so I can't.
Yeah, right. There may be an addendum to this podcast in which I re-record the whole thing. Anyway, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he was one of the first cases of writer's block. The first known cases of writer's block. Because he stopped writing in his late 20s. Most of his famous poems came from his mid-20s.
Right.
The ones that we would know and we might have studied at school.
That we clearly don't know.
I know, you just talked me out of it. And after that time, any ambitious writing projects inspired in him what he called an indefinite, indescribable terror. And he gave terror a capital T.
Okay.
I kind of know how he feels like this. I go through life with an indefinite, indescribable terror. But he actually wasted most of the rest of his life addicted to opium. And
Is that technically a waste?
I think so, yeah.
It probably is, yes, okay.
When you were as wonderfully accomplished at writing as him, he just wasted the rest. And, his contemporaries would kind of come up to him and be like, dude, what are you doing? Sort yourself out. And he'd be like, I can't, I am paralysed and disabled and I cannot sort my shit out. I'm not talking about addiction here, because that's an entirely different thing. I'm talking about the fact that he stopped writing because he decided that he was blocked and some. But it's really interesting because writers have probably suffered from this kind of thing, have probably suffered in writing since the beginning of writing. But it was only from like the early 19th century that writer's block became a thing. Okay.
It got given a name.
It got given a name, and the reason is because the idea of writing as an art form changed. This is really interesting. I find this really interesting because I'm a writer and a nerd. But before like the early 1900s, before the Romantic poets and that kind of thing, the Romantic writers thought of writing as like a rational, purposeful activity which they controlled.
Right.
So I'm gonna go for a walk and I'm gonna think of some ideas. And I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna write a poem or a book or whatever.
Did it kind of coincide with the invention of the novel?
No, novels came before that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just trying to think of one that came before that, and now I can't think of any, and you've destroyed me.
Bronte and all that was before 19...
That was before the... Yeah, there were novels before that. But the fashion of kind of romantic poetry and stuff. The early romantics, though, as I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted again...
That's what I'm here for. Yeah. Rude interruptions. Gin drinking.
So... Earlier writers thought of writing as a rational, purposeful activity which they controlled, right? But the early romantic writers and poets saw writing as external and somehow magically bestowed upon them.
Right.
So that's where I think the difference came. And Percy Shelley, who was another noted total junkhead.
As in Mary Shelley's fella?
Yes.
Okay.
Mary Shelley's fella, said, "A man cannot say I will compose poetry, because poetry was the product of some invisible influence, like an inconstant wind, which basically blew the material into the poet. He just had to wait for it to happen. And basically, drugs really fucked up art for everybody." I think drugs also created some really cool art, like Kubla Khan, and Kubla Khan did whatever.
Xanadu thingy
Coleridge as well.
Decree.
Anyway,
Xanadu.
Yeah. So, but yeah, they were like, oh, you know, we've just got to sit here and we've got to wait for the poetry muse to fart poetry in our general direction, and then we'll be able to write it. It's like, we don't write it. It is produced through us.
We are merely the mechanism for putting it on paper.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe that's the case. I can't say for 100% sure. I am not the all-knowing oracle of everything. But I tend to side with the pre-romantic writers who saw writing as a thing that they did, and they sat down and they controlled it, and they decided what was going to happen and when it was going to happen, and they didn't sit down and wait for inspiration to strike, because you will die of old age before that happens.
Right.
So, but yeah, like I said earlier, with the Prozac thing, the New Yorker in the same article also said that blocked writers are now being treated with antidepressants such as Prozac, though some report that the drugs tend to eliminate their desire to write together with their regret over not doing so. So it doesn't really help. And I remember when I was on antidepressants, it kind of removed the despair, but it also removed any enthusiasm for anything. And that's not really a very good thing.
It's not productive.
No. As a short-term fix, awesome. You know, because it was a short-term fix for all sorts of nastiness. But as a long-term fix, it's a hell of a horrible way to live.
So do you see writer's block as a thing separate to general procrastination and inability to achieve?
No, not really. I think that it has been given a name. I think that those things have been given a name.
Because of the poor artistic writers?
Yeah, yeah, a little bit. And I also don't think that there is any one, because you kind of said, you know, is it separate to procrastination? Is it separate to perfectionism? Is it separate to fear? I think they're all parts of the same, you know, that it's not as simple as saying, oh, it's writer's block and that's one thing. There are many, many reasons that you might not be able to.
It is a many-faceted jewel.
It is a many-faceted pile of poop. But yeah, I think sometimes it is just really bloody hard to write and to think and to do anything creative. I mean, you're creative. You solve engineering problems. Sometimes it must be really difficult to sit down and think about that kind of thing, right? You must have days where it's like, ugh, I'd rather actually just, you know, eat cheese or whatever.
Yes, eat sausage sandwiches.
Because it's a similar thing, but it's like we don't talk about engineering blocks. You know, you wouldn't refer to it as a creative block, would you? You'd just be...
Like today has not been very productive. I kept getting distracted and I did other things instead. And
sometimes that just happens, and, you know, it might be that you haven't done enough thinking about other things, because all creativity is making connections between different stuff. And so writers, because I think it's just sometimes difficult. To be creative is sometimes really difficult, and that doesn't mean that you have writer's block. It means that you have to sit down and work harder at it. Or go out for a walk and work harder at it, but not just kind of sit there and go, oh, I have writer's block and therefore I'm going to use that as an excuse to goof off for the day.
And there's loads of techniques for moving beyond a big blank piece of paper that's staring at you.
Yeah.
You know, there's all kinds of planning and breakdowns and bullet points and you know, key facts and all sorts of flow charts and diagrams and all sorts of stuff that you could be doing that is all productive and gets your thoughts on the paper and gets the paper not blank.
And there are other things that you can do as well that are really good fun and are equally as important as all the things that you've just mentioned. Like, no, but playing. I think adults don't play anymore, and you know, last night, and this is a really, really good thing. So last night, and it's not last night while you're listening to it, it's last night while we're recording it, I was at a dance class, contemporary dance, which I always find a little bit terrifying because even though I am an aerial dancer, I am not a ground dancer. I find it a little bit frightening to dance. And Beth, hi Beth.
Hi Beth.
Is an excellent teacher, and she had the whole class doing stuff, and she's like, oh, we're going to play a game. And so she had us point out 4 different parts of the room. So the logo, the mirrors, the ceiling, and the curtain in the dance studio. And then she was like, name body parts. Okay, so left foot, right arm, head, back. And then she paired those things together and she was like, right, I want you to throw your left foot towards the mirror. Do something with your left foot towards the mirror. Do something with your head towards the curtain. Do you know what I mean? And just those things, those simple movements, those simple combinations of ideas, triggers, had us, and we created some really cool dance moves. And these are people, and she was like, you've just choreographed a little piece of choreography. And that's a really big deal for a bunch of people who don't consider themselves to be dancers, you know? And I like to do similar things with my clients and my writers and the people that I'm coaching to get them thinking about how they can write and get their creativity going, and in ways that aren't necessarily related to the topic that you want to write about. It's just about getting you thinking and getting you unstuck. But you have to put the work in. And so for last night with the dance class, Beth's idea of getting us to put the work in was to give us these triggers. And it was like, oh, I couldn't possibly choreograph a piece of dance. Oh, wait a minute, I just did.
Here's the thing, yeah.
Yeah, so I think writer's block is not a condition that can be cured, and it's definitely not something that happens to us from the outside. I think what it is at its core is just a lot of fear. It's like layer upon layer of fear because we're terrified of failing. Sometimes we're terrified of succeeding. Success is a scary thing. And we're afraid to just like ship it, as Seth Godin would say. You know, just get it out there.
Just put it out.
Just put it out. And I think it's an excuse. I think writer's block is an excuse because writing is really hard. Creating anything is really hard. And whether that's a painting or a sculpture or a poem or an article or an engineering problem that you might be solving, some of them are really difficult, right?
Yes.
And if you just sat there and waited for inspiration to strike, what would happen?
It probably wouldn't.
No. So how do you solve engineering problems when you would just rather go and stick your head in a bucket and not look at it because it's really difficult? What sorts of things do you do to kind of spark ideas off?
I stand up, I put a pen in my hand, I stand next to a whiteboard, and I start drawing.
What do you draw? Willies.
Things related to the thing I'm thinking about, usually. And invariably another engineer will wander past eating a sausage sandwich and go, they'll be like, ooh, what are you doing there? And I'll describe the problem. It's a cat. There's a cat whinging in the background.
Noodle. Ugh. Being naughty.
So I'll explain the problem to the other engineer, and they will almost invariably pop up with a bright idea or a suggestion or two, and we'll draw a few things out and discard it's rubbish and then move on. But we've got beyond a blank piece of paper. We've got a few thoughts. We've got a few ideas, and we can get cracking. Cool.
And I know you've told me before as well that you have had people come to you with problems, and they're like, "Oh, this is an unsolvable problem. We can't do this. It's impossible." And you've been like, "Well, we did something a little bit similar in like the pharmaceutical industry or something."
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happens in my world is that I spend a lot of time in automotive places. I spend time in FMCG. I spend time in all kinds of different
fast-moving consumer goods.
Yeah, cans, packets of crisps, small things. And usually the people who work in those industries don't move much. You know, if you're a person who puts food in cans, you might work in a cat food factory and you might work in a baked bean factory, but your skills are putting things in cans and the machinery that does that. So when somebody walks in from the automotive industry, usually we've got some pretty good thoughts. Okay. It works well. So yeah, we kind of cross-pollinate across a lot of different industries.
Yeah, and I was having a conversation with somebody last night actually, and she just said, "Oh, I saw you posted your guitar play, 'cause I'm learning to play the guitar again. I saw you posted your guitar playing video," and I was like, "How do you find time to do all this stuff? You know, you run a business and you're renovating a cottage, and you spend all this time at the studio, and now you're learning to play the guitar." I was like, "I'm learning Spanish as well." And she was like, "What the fuck?" And I mean, part of the reason that I can do all those things is that I have designed my life in such a way that You know, I've got space for it. Also, we don't have children. That helps, I think.
That definitely helps.
And also, I really love learning stuff. I think it's really, really important to learn as much as possible about as many things as possible. And that's part of the reason why I can come up with really good ideas. You know, I was talking to one of my coaching clients today, and I came up with an idea for her. She's like, that's such a good idea. And the reason that I come up with good ideas is because I am interested in so many things and I'm learning stuff all the time. I listen to tons of podcasts and I read a lot, and you know, I don't know. I'm not
it's not magic.
It's not magic. No, be interested, be curious. The best way to beat writer's block or to beat any creative block is to be interested in as much stuff as you can. And you know, we live in this incredible universe that is filled with wonders and amazingness and just really cool stuff. It's not all doom and gloom. Stop listening to so much news. The world is an incredible place. There is so much to be interested in that I am always baffled when I hear somebody say I'm bored. It's like, how can you be bored? What?
You're clearly not paying attention.
Yeah. And you know, it's like if you're bored, go for a walk and think, or just sit and think, or watch a TV show, or pick up a book. Something. There is so much to be interested in.
Go and break out of your routine. Go and do something else.
Yeah. And so if you're thinking, you know, that you've got writer's block, that it's hard, that you don't want to do it, that's fine. It is hard. It is really sometimes very, very hard to write stuff and to create anything. But when it gets really hard and we can't seem to think of anything, we tend to blame that lack of inspiration, and we blame writer's block, and we blame anything rather than sit down and do the work. And I think that's the problem. But a really odd thing happens when we kind of sit down and make words appear on paper anyway, because that's when inspiration starts to appear. Mm-hmm. Ideas start to flow, motivation comes, because something that I've learned over the last few years is that action doesn't come from motivation. That's not the way around that it comes. You're not motivated to act. Motivation comes from doing something. You have to start. You have to get started, and that's when motivation comes. You're not motivated. No, motivation never comes from just sitting on the sofa and doing nothing. When has that ever motivated you to do anything?
It's usually motivated me to sit on the sofa some more.
Exactly. Yeah. But if you want to, you know, if you've ever done a long running distance, if you ever trained running or trained anything like that, it's really hard to get out the front door.
God, I hate running.
Joe really hates running.
It's for children and criminals. That's all it's for. Jesus, I hate running.
I used to run a lot. You used to run a bit, but it was, even though I like running, or I liked running, I liked the being on my own and kind of, you know, being out in the fresh air. It was really hard to get out the door. But once you've taken a few steps, it gets easier and easier and easier.
That is very true.
And you might get tired, and you might be like, oh, I'm actually knackered now, my legs hurt. But you're motivated to keep going because you've started. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mm. The start is the difficult bit.
The starting is the difficult bit.
It's like getting out of bed is the most tricky bit of the day.
Oh, I bloody love being up early. If I could drag my carcass out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, 10 minutes after I got out of bed, or half an hour after I got out of bed, I'd be delighted, because I actually love being up early. I love that feeling of smugness, and I love the I'm the first person that's, you know, awake. Seeing the day. Getting out of bed is, I'm very bad at it, aren't I?
Not too bad, but you're not great.
I'm very bad at it. I get it. My dad is the worst getter-upper in the world. He is the most grumpy man ever. It's really funny. So yes, inspiration does not appear from nowhere and create wonderful writing. Inspiration comes from thinking and reading and listening and scribbling and being interested in things. Getting started.
Just do something.
Even if it's just a nonsense poem, like we talked about nonsense poetry a couple of episodes ago. Even if that's what you're doing, like random word association.
Which is what Beth was doing with curtains and head.
That's exactly what Beth was doing last night in the dance class. Yeah. So yeah, professionals don't sit around and wait for inspiration to strike. They get on with it, even when it's the hardest thing in the world. You know, writers write, and so can you.
Nice.
Yeah. So, what's the takeaway, Joe?
Don't allow preconceived ideas of what's true to stop you doing what you can do.